There we go. Tribe is back at it, boys. Welcome to another Philosophy Club, ladies and gentlemen. My screen is all wonky here. Let me fix that for you guys. We got Tabalo, Garrett, Emma, Liam, Edge of Fit. Welcome to the stream, guys. Today we're going to be doing, philosophy stuff, but also start off with a short little video by BU. I've got to find it in my files.
I sent it in the co-working lounge chat.
Oh, you did? Okay. Pop the co-working chat open.
Really I hate unboxing videos. I was like, holy shit, this is awesome.
Wait, okay, so I need to actually share this screen though. Sorry, this is taking a minute. Share screen, application, there we go. Alright, can you guys see it now? Can you see it? Hello? Hello?
Yeah.
Okay. Oh wait, the stream couldn't see it. Alright, now they can. They almost burnt their house down making this.
Worth it.
Yeah, that's dope. That's dope. Honestly, I never really watch unboxing videos either, but it was so unique. Alright, how do I close out of this? Oh, I'm still showing the Twitter, that's why. There we go. It's the music too, for sure, yeah. Music is like 70% of it for watching that kind of stuff.
Yeah, well, it's the synchronizing it with the cuts and stuff, right?
Right.
All right, so let's see. What are
the hot topics today?
Have you ever talked about Asabiah?
Is Nate here yet?
Garrett, I feel like the big thing right now is
I'm not doing AI.
Oh, damn it.
I do AI too much. I had too many talking things where I've done AI recently. It's the same thing every time too. It's like, no, they can't be sentient. You just don't understand how brains work. Let's see. Okay, we could do.
Brains are sentient though.
When are we gonna have an AGI?
Let's.
Yo, Nate's here. What up, Nate?
We could do. Welcome. We could do the theory of everything, or we could do Asabiah, or
the theory of everything. That's probably a good one. That's the Eric Weinstein stuff, right?
No, it's mine, dog.
Oh, you have one too?
Oh yeah, I've had mine for like a decade. It's only been in print since 2018, but I had drafts of it for longer than that, and I've been thinking about it for a decade. So
video's not working, Nate.
Yeah, let's do it. All right. I'm gonna have to pull up some charts. So, the reason why I was thinking about this is hanging out with my buddy Scott, who I've known for 15 years, and he was like, "Hey, I saw this video where they were scientists were looking at particles, and they kept going down smaller and smaller, and they think the smallest thing is information. That's crazy." I was like, "Dude, how have you not heard this from me 10 times in the amount of time that I've known you?" So, in the event anyone has not heard this before, the reason why I got into philosophy is because I figured if you could figure out one true thing and just try and build everything else off of that, you could make a first principles system that makes sense all the way down the line. Because that's not really how people do philosophy. First off, a lot of times when people say someone has a philosophy or Nietzsche's philosophy, right, is usually a collection of opinions and thoughts and commentaries on stuff, right? It's not normally a really coherent set of things that are derived from each other axiomatically, right? So, the last little bit of preface, and we'll jump into it. But if anyone is unfamiliar with the concept of an axiom, AXIOM, it's a really cool word. Axioms are basically your assumptions. So if you say something is true axiomatically, it means you're not going to try and figure out why that's true. It's your baseline assumptions, right? So like 1 + 1 = 2. There are math people that try and figure out what the axioms of math are, but like we can just agree that 1 + 1 = 2, right? That's an axiom that we have, that numbers added to numbers, you know, and there's math laws and shit for that. I'm not good at math, so don't quote me on any of that, but
There's
That's
the
assuming
link.
there's truth.
yeah, well, act like it's there and act like it isn't there and see who does better would be my argument. So my basic premise, well, there's a couple premises before we get into the thing, right? So I think truth exists. I think reality is real. A lot of people don't. I think that's delusional. I mean, if a schizophrenic says we live in a simulation or like a Gnostic hellscape or something, you're like, oh, that person's crazy, and their life is fucked up. But if like a scientist says it, then people are like, oh, this is great. But it's the same kind of thing, just higher functioning person, right? So
Hold on. I think one thing I'm like seeing more in like the information social media space is how people like apply a heuristic, but it's only to like a subset of group, but like philosophically or principally, something has to apply to like all or of things, right?
which
And
is exactly where we're starting. Yes.
yeah, okay. I just wanted to kind of add like I'm observing like people are like just can't understand what they're projecting isn't them like themselves. It's kind of weird.
Bingo. You're right on track, to ball. You're nailing it. So you have a variety of the right assumptions. So okay. First things first, right? What Tabala just said is the most important thing in all of philosophy, I think, because this is the thing that everyone ignores, and then all their shit is fucked up. Before we even get to dealing with reality, you actually have to go through yourself, right? So a website that I used to run a long time ago that is since my blog, which has been folded into the Ion Enterprises site, was called Master Self. And the premise, I think it was the second or third article that I wrote, which I will try and find for you at some point. Let me get through the soliloquy first. But the statement that I made, which I think is pretty damn good for the third article that I wrote, is basically we can only understand others to the extent and in the manner that we understand ourselves, right? So a lot of times people confuse stuff like empathy and sympathy, where it's like I can understand how that would feel bad, which is sympathy, versus I can relate to that and it feels bad, which is empathy, right? But what that really means is that I'll use a metaphor, right? When you go to the eye doctor and they have that crazy eye doctor glasses thing with the 400 lenses on it, right?
Ophthalmoscope?
Is that what it's called?
I think so.
That's cool. Sure, the ophthalmoscope. You can imagine that everyone, and this is a little bit of like Plato here, if you're familiar with Plato's cave, but maybe we'll get into that at some point. I don't really want to. That's a different direction. But everybody basically is born with some amount of hardware between them and reality, right? So there are some things in there like your personality, the chemical makeup of your brain, right? Like if you have the MAO short chain allele, you're probably going to get in more fights, right? It changes the way that you perceive threats, right? You're going to get angry faster. You're going to get violent faster. You're going to hold grudges forever because your brain processes dopamine differently, right? So we can understand that there are basic neurochemical, your starting hardware that dictates how you're going to perceive things in the world, right? Some people, if somebody bumps into them at the bar, they're like, hey, sorry, shrug it off. If you're one of the people with that gene variation, right, is generally considered in modern society to be a bad mutation. Somebody bumps into you at the bar, and then you just punch him in the face or hit him with a bottle or something, right? You're much more likely to start fights. So your self, your person rather, is often an impediment to seeing reality, because you have, you know, if you've ever used the eye doctor thing, the ophthalmoscope, there are lenses built into it, and then other lenses go in front of those lenses, and those probably are not, there's probably no magnification or whatever, right? But they're still there. And so you can think about thoughts, feelings, ideas, opinions, emotions, you know, beliefs. All these things are like different lenses that you can put on and take off. Some of them you can put on and take off. Others are built in, right? If you have that gene, you're probably going to get in a lot of fights, right? You're going to assume things are more threatening. You're going to hold grudges. It's just how your brain's going to work, right? It's not processing dopamine the same way. Where people mess up, especially in modern times, I think, is they don't acknowledge the existence of these built-in perceptual lenses, or like, you know, innate biases. And so in philosophy, a lot of times people talk about cognitive fallacies, and they'll talk about biases and stuff like this, but actually they're not dealing with their own a lot of the time. They're looking at other people and stuff like that. So you can look at, and this is a good rule of thumb, and then we'll get back on the main topic, but Nietzsche is kind of like a sickly dude, so he sees the world very much about like becoming powerful, and the weak are, you know, victims of the strong and stuff like that. Marx never had a job, so he sees everything about rich people versus poor people. You know, Kant didn't leave his house really very much, so he sees everything as like the world of ideas that he lives in his head. You know, Socrates didn't have a lot of his own opinions, so he would just go argue with people. You know, Plato was a wrestler, so he probably fought people that he disagreed with, which is why he's wrong about a lot of stuff. So it all factors in, right? With that in mind, one of the things that the modern kind of scientific worldview doesn't really do well or at all is deal with the subjective, right? Your consciousness is fundamentally subjective. You have experiences. You know, science can tell you that there is a color called yellow, that we call a part of the electromagnetic spectrum yellow, right? But it cannot describe empirically the nature of the experience of seeing yellow versus blue, or at all, right? We could say people who look at red are more likely to get angry or make purchasing decisions, and people who look at blue are more likely to be calm. But they can't tell you what it's like to have those things, because the experience is subjective. And so 50% of reality is our perception of reality. Reality is two things. It's what it is and what you think it is, right? And if what you think it is isn't what it is, you're in for a rude awakening, right? So with that in mind, where does the subjective come from, right? Where does consciousness arise from? Why is there something rather than nothing, right? Why is there life and not just rocks in space or something, right? So we have to imagine two universes. One universe has no life, no...
Uh-oh, Garrett disappeared. It's just me.
Did his Wi-Fi go out?
Am I back?
Yeah.
Yeah, you're back.
That was weird. It just literally, Discord just crapped out. No biological life, no organisms, no consciousness, nothing. It's just inert matter. It's just rocks and, you know, dust and gases and things like that, right? And the other universe has only a consciousness with no body, no sensory organs, nothing to look at, nothing to touch, taste, see, smell, hear, right? Could we prove that either of these things exist, right? If you entered into the inanimate object universe, well, now there's something to observe it. So we can say, oh, I can see it. It's real now, right? If you were the consciousness floating in the void with, you know, absolutely nothing, no perceptual mechanisms, no, you know, nerves, no organs, no, you know, none of that, you would have no ability to think about anything. You would have no concepts, right? So what I would make the argument that a fully material universe and a fully idealist universe, like a Platonist universe, is irrelevant. We cannot, it may exist, but there's no way to prove that it exists, right? Because you being there, if you go to the floating brain or the floating consciousness universe, you've supplied some matter, right? You have concepts and organs and particles and shit. And if you go to the dead universe, you've supplied some consciousness, right? So while there may be universes without matter or universes without consciousness, they're irrelevant. It doesn't matter, which is a little bit of a play on words, I guess. So,
I just want to like ground it down and make it tangible because there's a lot of this like stuff circulating where the BBC's interviewing Musk on Twitter Spaces, and like the BBC's framing like why is all this hateful information happening, and like it's the way they frame the authority on information and truth. It's like a way people use words to assume hierarchy, like they're on a higher authoritative position just through their linguistical engineering or their semantics, and it's like, and it's less so even just like legit social structures or socio-cultural structures of like money and power and resources or military might. It's just more like who can use the most clever English to like give the perception of true or who's right or wrong, versus any objective like thing, right?
well, let's get to that because this will get us there. That's the point of the theory, which we're now at, which I'm going to explain, is that if this is true, then we can extrapolate all the rest of my philosophy out from this, and we can start to understand how these things work, right? So I basically gambled and said, I think this one thing is true. If this is wrong, all of my work is wrong, right? It may be useful, but it's not correct, right? But I think this one thing is true. I think that as potential energy is used up, information is produced. I think they are two halves of the same thing. It's like, if you burn something, smoke comes out of it, right? Heat comes out of it, light comes out of it. So there's that exchange is going on and information is produced. What does that mean? I think information is something that is fundamentally relative to some kind of consciousness. I think consciousness probably goes all the way down. Not in the way that we think conscious like a human, right? Because a human consciousness versus a dog's consciousness are very different. And you can imagine, like, we know trees have some kind of stuff going on. I don't think it's necessarily like abstract thought. They probably aren't using words. They don't have mouths, right? But trees communicate with each other. Their root networks, they grow in patterns around each other. There's
they speak vibes.
Yeah, there's something going on there, right? And so I think basically the nature of the universe is such that consciousness is a fundamental property of reality, and it is a counterforce to entropy, basically. As energy is being burned up, information, and via information, life, biological life, right? Like, probably all the way down to DNA, RNA, maybe single organic molecules. Somebody made the argument recently that quarks have rules, like social rules. Like if there's a quark that springs into existence, either it pairs with two other quarks and makes a triad, or they disappear, right? So that, in a really, really basic sense, is almost like a social rule at the bottom. Now, again, I'm not saying social like people. I don't think quarks are like have personalities and stuff. But something about the nature of reality makes complicated things organize out of less complicated things by themselves, seemingly, right? It just happens. And so this is where, if this is true, then life is moving, I call it, like, on the big picture sense, the tendency towards complexity, in the sense that biological life tends to get more complex with time. And in people, I call it the will to order. right? So it's kind of a reference to Nietzsche's will to power, and I think Schopenhauer had a will to something too. Um, but it's basically we order things. That's what we do. We, things happen and we make sense out of them. Events happen and we make stories. And, if we tell those stories for a long time, they turn into myths and they're actually full of lots of really surprisingly profound wisdom, even though they weren't designed that way necessarily. We have the ability to take random shit that happens and turn it into something useful. And that's both something that DNA does on its own. It's something that, animals are able to do. Yeah, beavers can build nests, dams, whatever, right? Birds build nests, all that kind of stuff. But people are able to take a random string of events that happen and pull out patterns and use that to do more efficient work in the future, right? So this brings us into the next critical concept. If you imagine the moment before the beginning of time, right? There's no time. There's not space yet, right? So everything in existence is condensed into a single point that, will happen, has already happened, is currently happening. There's no time. Everything's all at once, right? And it's all in a single point. That's a singularity. That's basically like what's going on at the bottom of a black hole or the top of a white hole. So I think time, as we see it, is a span between a white hole and a black hole, right? And so because time is nonlinear, there could be many white holes and many black holes. But if you drew a line between two of them, that's a timeline. That's what we have, right? So when basically where people generally get how black holes work, so I won't go into that, but it's a super dense condensed chunk of matter that is so powerful that light can't escape it. A white hole is the same thing but backwards. So a white hole is expanding so fast that you can never get to the middle of it. Like it's a universal law one-way street. So if you imagine, like when we think of the Big Bang, why would it make more sense that the universe sprang into existence from nothing, or it's just an infinite chain of singularities on both sides, spitting stuff out, sucking stuff in, recycling forever, right? And that was part of my thought with this is like, okay, well, it doesn't make any sense. Like just saying things just magically sprung into existence and they're going to fizzle out it doesn't make any sense at all. Like matter can be neither created nor destroyed, right? It only changes forms, energy. But how does it change the forms, right? Because what you end up with, and this is really heady, so I'll try and explain this really simply. But when you're talking about cause and effect, there's a word called causality. Causality is I push a domino, that domino tips over other dominoes. At the end of all the dominoes, there's a Rube Goldberg machine that hits Sam with a boxing glove, right? So the causality of that is I built the machine because I thought it'd be funny, and then I tap the dominoes hit each other, Sam gets punched with a boxing glove, right? So what you end up with when you start thinking about causality, we know every action has an equal opposite reaction. Where is the first cause, right? That's a really tricky problem because saying there's a first cause, that cause has to be caused by something. And people in science usually just kind of like ignore this because it's a philosophical problem, not a scientific problem. And religion usually says, "Oh, God is the first cause," right? Some variation on that. But then you get, I don't know. I think that's an acceptable enough answer. If you consider whatever the thing that lives outside of time is probably everything at once, and that's infinite timelines, infinite universes, infinite matter, infinite energy, like all condensed. That seems like something that would fit in the definition of a deity to me. We don't have to get into religion with that, but I think that works.
So would we be like, are we detached from that? Because I start thinking of a lot of like Gnostic lore.
Think about a ball of yarn, Tabala, right? Let's pretend the singularity is a ball of yarn, right? The timeline is like pulling a thread out of the ball of yarn. You can't pull the whole thing apart, but you can pull a thread out and it leaves the ball of yarn at one point and reconnects to it at another point. So it's like I think time is something like that. Like we're pulled out of this, like, perfect, timeless, energy based, existence or something like that. Maybe that's, I don't like to speculate as to why those sorts of things would happen, because if you're talking about something before the beginning of time or after the end of time, we have no way of dealing with it. It's cool to think about. It's pretty irrelevant in the scope of like the nature of your consciousness exists within time. So trying to deal with something outside of time is you're setting yourself up for failure. Uh, but I would say it's fun for speculation. It's not really good for like theorizing, like hard theories. So for whatever reason, right? Maybe there's not a point outside of time. Maybe we just go back and forth from one or the other. But you can imagine there's something like that things are coming out of and returning to that would, even if it's just a little point in the middle, right? Like of the beginning and the end. I don't know. And I won't go super far with that because it's just speculating. It's fun.
I read a book is like the origin of the bicameral mind, and I think a lot of our time, like we try to we try to dissociate or step back. Yeah, dude, that book is that's a hard read actually.
That is one of the most complicated books I think I've ever read, and I'm only like a third of the way through it.
It's just very, like just a mind fuck the whole time. But like the thing we do is like through our nature is like we just try to like separate into duality, which is like natural, but it's also prevents us from seeing like a holistic, just integrated, interconnected means of it, because it's like once you say something that's true, the absolute polar opposite is likely true as well. So it's like there's this weird natural force of like paradox plus like synchronization.
That is exactly where we were going. So you're on point this whole time. The way that I break it down, because basically you can imagine a universe. You can imagine, maybe with some success, a universe with zero things in it, which would just be nothingness, right? We can't. At no point in our lives will we ever interact with nothingness, because if we're there interacting with it, we're there, right? But we can imagine a universe where only one thing exists, which is just everything condensed to a point with no time, no space. It's just pure being or pure existence, or so, who knows, right? But you can imagine that, like, you just took everything in the world, multiply that by infinite amounts of timelines, and just put it all in one spot. It already happened, it'll happen again, it's just there, right? So that's the one that we in philosophy there's a bunch of different names for this. I think it's called Yuji, like, so in Chinese philosophy you have the absolute, and then you have the taiji, right, which is yin yang. So you get, out of one you get two. Duality, right? Now, duality, we assume it's either or, and that's a mistake. In reality, it's both and, right? The existence, like Tabala said, the existence of one thing basically guarantees that the opposite exists. Every action has an equal opposite reaction. That is just a fact, right? However, as soon as you get two, you actually get three, because you have the relationship between two and three. So you can imagine Tabalo and I just spring into existence in the void, right? Tabalo exists, I exist, but now there's a relationship between the two of us, right? Even if it's just, hey, we're both floating in this void and now we're gravitating around each other, there is a third thing that emerges as soon as you have two. So the smallest number is one, and then it's three. Because two immediately becomes three, right? So in my philosophy, I tried to break this down with three values. And this is the most like comprehensive way to summarize how I think all the shit works, right? You have the duality, which is will and love, right? Will is like the masculine force, it's order, it's hierarchy, it's logic, reason. Masculine, feminine too. You can throw those out. That doesn't mean man, woman. It means more like the conceptual representation of that. I'm not making like, people get mad about gender stereotypes. It's not that. Nobody is pure masculine. Nobody's pure feminine, right? But you have, it's this like logical, ordered, everything goes in boxes. It's very discrete. It's very like tangible. It's objective. It's facts and numbers. It's cold, right? And then on the other side of that, you have love. And love represents the exact opposite: chaos, discovery, new things happening, novelty, emotion, the opposite of reason. So people say irrational like it's a bad thing, but people are super rational, and that's just the way that we are for a reason. Like, that's part of the world. Emotional is not inherently bad, just like reason is not inherently good. Frankly, many of the worst things in the world were done for logical reasons, right? So you have these two things that complement each other. All things can be split into some form of duality. That's just the way that we tend to think. We are dualistic in our worldview. The world is built on assumptions of duality, right? And usually it's one against the other, which is a mistake. If you look at things in physics, right? If I push my headphone case, it moves as a result, right? There's not a better or worse. It's just the way that it is. There's always the counterforce, right? And so they're both necessary. You need to be logical and emotional. You have masculine and feminine components yourself. Order is good sometimes, and chaos is good sometimes, right? All good things originally came out of chaos, and many bad things are the result of old order falling apart, right? So, like I said before, we have two, so there's automatically three. The third value is truth. Truth is the relationship between the two halves, right? So if you put them together, you have the truth with a capital T. But if you split them apart, you have two different kinds of truth. The order, the will version of truth is veritas, which is the Roman word or the Latin word where we get like verify, verification, veritable is more straightforward like that. But that's like tangible, numbers and science and all that is veritas truth. It's factual, but it does not contain meaning. It doesn't contain emotional content. If I do a study on like soil samples and say, yep, there's 2% aluminum in the soil, that's just a fact. It has nothing attached to it. And so interpretation is always left to the chaos half, right? To love and emotional parts of the brain, right? So we flip over, right? If you're looking at chaos stuff, it's, hey, what if we did this? Oh, I don't know what will happen if we do this, right? You're going outside of the bounds of will and order and this kind of like structural view of the universe. But this is where people fall in love. This is where emotions exist. Meaning lives here, right? Purpose lives here. Your purpose isn't to, check the aluminum levels in the soil. Your purpose might be to discover the mysteries of the earth, but mysteries live in chaos. It's a love thing. You have to love something that pushes you into chaos, into the unknown. Otherwise, you're just going to be Kant and sit in your room and think about rules for shit that you're never going to do, right? Truth. Oh, yeah, and I left out one thing. So, love's version of truth.
That's a clip.
Love's half of truth is Gnostic. The word is gnosis in Greek, which is where we get diagnosis, prognosis, prognosticate. Gnosis is like a subjective truth. So the color yellow is a Gnostic truth, right? That particular band on the electromagnetic spectrum is a veritas truth, right? But the experience of yellow, like, oh, somebody's wearing a yellow dress and they look sunny and cheerful, or somebody's serial killer's favorite color is yellow for some reason. Like, that's a weird thing to know. Why? That's asking why is always in chaos, because if you're asking why, you don't know. It's a love thing, right? If you combine objective truth and subjective truth, you get capital T truth. And the word that I use for that is aletheia. Aletheia is a Greek word. So in the Greek underworld, they have a river called Lethe, Lethe. Lethe, I don't know how you pronounce it. But when in Greek mythology, when you die, Charon ferries you across the river Styx, and then they dip you in the river Lethe, and you forget. So Lethe means like forgetting or concealedness or hiddenness, right? So aletheia is the quality of being unhidden. So the best definition would be the unhidden truth, right? It's just the truth. It's the whole thing. Gnostic truth and Veritas truth are both pieces of the whole thing. But if you only have one, you're missing half of the puzzle, right? Why does it matter that Batman doesn't kill people, right? That's a meaning question. Why does it matter how Tony Stark can build the Iron Man suit? That's a Veritas question. Like, it's technical shit that really isn't important to the story having meaning, right? But if you're making a scientific diagram, you really want to know how to build the suit, right? But when you combine both of those things, you have a complete understanding of the world, because the world is actually not divided at all. Everything is all part of one big thing. It's distinct but inseparable, right? Just like the yin yang symbol, which is a really just one of the most phenomenally brilliant symbols ever designed. It contains an entire picture of the universe in one. You have duality that form a circle. It's the whole shebang, right? So I'm going to share in the chat one of the several diagrams we may get to today, which this one we're going to kind of gloss over. The top 3 rows of this we're going to use as a reference for what I just explained. If I can find it. There it is. No. There it is. So this is originally, it's called the Tetractys, which is a Pythagorean mystical symbol. And in Pythagorean mysticism, which, believe it or not, the guy who made the Pythagorean theorem believed that shapes were magic and beings were evil and all kinds of crazy stuff. But it was like a mystery religion. It wasn't like, going to geometry class. And so the original version of this is just 1 dot, 2 dots, 3 dots, 4 dots, right? So in his version, you have the monad, which is, that thing outside of time, the perfect singularity, the unmanifest Godhead, whatever you want to call it, the thing before the Big Bang, if you want to use science words. Then you have the dyad, which is the 2, the triad, and the tetrad, right? So 1 makes 2, 2 makes 3, 3 makes 4. And I think the 4 is the 4 elements, but we're going to ignore the bottom ones. Those are 4 game symbols, and I made this is not exactly the use case for this diagram, but at any rate. So once we understand this very seemingly simple, but it's actually wildly complicated thing, that duality is real and also an illusion, right? There are always 2 kinds of things, but they require each other to exist. Right? You can't have one without the other. They're distinct but inseparable. Then everything else in the world starts to make a whole lot more sense. Left versus right politics, right? Men's problems versus women's problems. You can split pretty much anything into a duality, and if you only see the differences, then you're always going to miss the big picture, which is that everything is one. Which at the top of that pyramid that I put in there is my this symbol, which is the AIO symbol, or all-in-one, or alpha, iota, omega, which is my attempt to turn all of the stuff that I just told you into a picture, which I will briefly kind of explain what's going on in there. So basically, you have the first thing is the triangle. In alchemy, you have different symbols for the elements, which are a variety of triangles, right? You have upward-facing triangles, downward-facing triangles, and you have triangles with little lines across them, right? So upward-facing is fire. Fire is a masculine element. It's energetic. It destroys. It warms. It does stuff, right? Downward-facing triangle with no line through it is water. Water collects. It cools. It's receptive. It moves towards the bottom, whereas fire burns up. Water always goes down. And then an upward-facing triangle with a line through it is air, because it's above the earth. That's what the line represents. And then, or kind of the horizon, I guess. And a downward-facing triangle with a line through it is earth. It's below the middle, right? So inside of that symbol that I have in there is the alchemical symbol for air. That represents the letter A, which is the beginning of time, pure energy. No, nothing has happened yet. It's just the ability to manifest, to make things occur. That's like it's the beginning, right? Everything comes out pure energy. It explodes. Things start happening, and every time things happen, less things can happen in the future at a certain point because you're running out of potential energy. But out of that, we get stuff, right? The next thing, if you look at the symbol, you'll see a circle with two little circles in the middle of it. That's the letter O for omega, which is the end of time. So all the energies run out, but we've gained information, right? So it's perfect wisdom. It's like, you know, everything in the world. It's all of the information accumulated, whatever. And that is represented by the alchemical symbol for gold, which is a circle and a dot in the middle, which is called the circumpunct. Basically, there are two of those. So you have the outer one, which is like the perfection of reality, because reality is complete at the end of time. And then the inner one is like the aspiration to perfect the self, to become better, to learn, to grow, right? So that's, if you read like Carl Jung, when he talks about alchemy, he talks about it as like this esoteric practice of trying to turn the soul, like transmute lead, which is the flawed human soul, into gold, which is like the spiritual kind of attainment, right? Finally, down the middle, the three little diamonds represent the letter I, which is iota. And if you think of the connotation of the word iota, it's like a tiny little speck, right? Iota is the ratio. If you picked a point on the timeline, right? If you're on the far left of the timeline, you're at alpha, it's pure energy. If you're at O, it's pure information. Put a point anywhere, and you have a proportion between those two things, because they're always perfectly balanced, right? Iota is where we are. We just don't know what the proportion is necessarily, right? But we are a speck somewhere on that timeline. And actually, that's where everything's happening, right? Things don't happen in the past. Things might happen in the future, but everything's always happening in iota, right? So that's basically tries to sum up my whole philosophy. There's a lot of triple things in there. It's also all in one, right? And that's, you know, kind of the point. There's also, you can see kind of a yin yang with a third bit in the middle too. At any rate, so let's see. Tabalo input. This is a good break point if you have thoughts.
I always like learning the like technical symbology from you and getting real knowledge on the heuristics. I missed a little bit, so I'm gonna try to catch up. But I like my mind goes to where uh I have this general opinion that people have to learn how to create themselves, and like they need to create something, and everybody has to create something. And it's this weird, like, super metaphysical power we have as humans, even though a lot of people don't really get in tune with that. Like, so the same way you've created like the Aeon symbols and all your like all the beautiful designs and stuff like that, it's kind of that same concept of like people have to learn to embrace that force to like manifest from their mind. It's kind of where this takes me down. And the more people get in tune with like their power of their mind, the less they'll feel like they're powerless against, just abstract, omnipresent, ethereal, whatever cultural politics or whatever. It kind of flips the whole narrative on its head, and it's also like the most empowering thing, like just overcoming mental health, business, money, because you think about it differently. You start thinking more of how you like envision the fine-grained wiring or path of achieving an outcome, and like when you create symbols or memes or brands or businesses, or that's like the process of that, the live it's like the lifestyle of that, and that's a lot of what we do here. But yeah, that's where my mind's going.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I'm going to kind of riff on some symbolism stuff, because we did a little bit more symbolism than I would normally do in this version of this chat. But the way that people think is very, very similar to symbols. So in your brain, if I say, I always give the example tree, because tree has like 5 different meanings. But if I say the word tree, right, there's a variety of things that happen immediately, right? Probably you assume that we're talking about a tree, like a plant that is a tree, right? You might have a specific idea of what kind of tree we mentioned. I think pine tree, because it's like the generic tree. But you could also imagine like a deciduous tree instead. But we have the word tree. We have the abstract concept tree that ties all this stuff together. We have the sound of the word tree, the letters in the word tree. a coat tree, a factor tree, um, you know, I know there's more kinds of trees. All of these things and many more, every kind of tree, an apple tree, you know, an oak tree, acorns, all that stuff gets tied up in this concept, right? So concepts are like pure knowledge. It's like the smallest unit of knowledge, and you can have concepts that are made up of more concepts, right? But if you went all the way into the abstract, there's like the central broad concept tree that encompasses a bunch of these different things, right? Symbols represent concepts in the same way. So like words are literally symbols, right? The letter T represents the sound, right? The the word tree represents several of these things. And so when we can create symbols for stuff, we give people something to attach concepts to, right? You can explain the entirety of Christianity with a cross, right? There's the crucifixion, and you also have the intersection of heaven and earth, right?
Well, some might argue that's actually Roman Catholicism, and then the Protestants just kind of ran with it. But anyways,
that's a different debate. We're not getting into a religious debate, but the yin yang symbol explains all of like Chinese philosophy immediately. It's amazing, right? Two that make one. There you go. They're balanced, light and dark. Masculine, feminine, whatever. That's the symbol. The symbol represents the whole thing, right? I'm trying to think of some other good ones. Target's logo is a target, right? It's great. It's very simple, very memorable. Walmart screwed up when they got their new logo because the smiley face was much better. I don't know. Their new thing is like a bunch of exclamation points or something. It's stupid. But symbols represent concepts. Symbols get tied to concepts, and it's like an abstract version. So, for example, if I just showed you the ion symbol with no explanation, your ability to pull information out of that is going to be iffy, and it's going to be relative to how much you know about really esoteric symbolism, because there's like 25 symbols in there, and I'm not going to go through all of them. But if you understand all the other stuff that I'm talking about, I can point out these things and be like, oh, I get it. I see how they all fit together, right? Symbols are very, very, very powerful because the symbol is like the master concept, right? It's the thing that all the things get tied to. So you can think about the difference, and like your idea of a person can also be a symbol. Like some people view Donald Trump as a symbol of like tyranny and misogyny and sexism, and other people view him as like Washington outsider who's a hero of the working class and stuff like this. And probably neither of these things are as true as either side thinks they are. Probably they're both true, right? Because there's duality again.
So I want to dig into that part of it. Okay,
not politics. That was
not the politics, the philosophy, and like how it relates to the id psychologically. So like when everyone sees these like larger than life or these societal dynamics that are just some like circus stage things, and then they have their observation, and like you're saying, they'll attribute like a symbol or an idea or a feeling or a mood to that, and based on their culture or upbringing, whatever. But how do you have consensus on like what someone symbolizes versus like what their actual identity is? Like, what's the consensus of that? How do you have?
You don't. So this is the tricky part, right? So we can, if we were saying, I really don't want to use Trump again as an example, but let's just use him and get it over with. So if we were saying objective things about Donald J. Trump Jr., right, or whatever, he's not Junior. You could say he's a man. He was the president. He's whatever 6'3" or something, or probably 240 pounds, right? You can say all these facts. This contains no emotional content, right? This is like a bio, like a description, right? Once you get into chaos, we don't have facts anymore, right? That's the thing. There's a lot of knowledge in the world that is not factually based, right? If you get a gut feeling that somebody's like a con artist, you're probably right, even if you don't have the facts to back it up, right? You should trust your gut on those things. I've worked for con artists. Don't do it. It sucks. Trust your gut. But that's the thing. Okay, telling someone to trust their gut is saying rely on non-rational means to make a decision, right? That's a weird thing to say in the world that we live in, but actually your gut is way older than the logical part of your brain, right? You have the ability to read body language, posture, probably fucking like smells and stuff, like, you know, shifty eyes, weird patterns of speech. That's much more robust than your you know, couple million-year-old prefrontal cortex where all the thinking goes on. But you need both of these things because also your gut doesn't invent like the airplane, right? You might have a gut feeling that you could fly if you really figured it out, but that's all done up here. So it's when you have both of these things that are balanced, and especially like this is where if you have a really good gut and you're not good at articulating yourself, you might say, "Oh, I'm getting really bad vibes off this person," and then everyone else is gonna be like, "Oh yeah, but you know, give them a shot or whatever," right? Being able to do both of these things means that you're going to connect with people emotionally, which matters, and be able to back it up rationally, which is what's, you know, people will not take you seriously if you can't do this. And if you can do both of those things, you're unstoppable, right? Emotions are very powerful. Logic is very powerful. But in persuasion, there are three things, right? Ethos, pathos, logos. There's that number again. We have we'll start with pathos, right? Pathos is love, is emotion, is chaos, is gut, is non-rational, is you know, maybe it's intuitive. I think it's more like gut than intuition, which is different. And that's the oldest part of your brain, right? That's the basal ganglia, which is like millions and millions of years old. Lizards have that. They call it the lizard brain. You have the paleomammalian cortex, which is tens of millions of years old, which is concerned with stuff like social relationships, hierarchy, status, power, land, getting resources, right?
That's your prefrontal cortex, right?
That's the paleomammalian cortex, is
So
ethos.
that's the bat?
Ethos,
Okay.
the middle, technically, but your brain goes in a curve, right? So it's coming up and around. Like, think of a shepherd's crook. It's going
Would it be considered the root?
No, well, no, this is so your nervous system, the reason why the chakras are cool is not because they're like magical things. The chakras are cool because literally where all the chakras are, it relates to a significant development in the neurological system, right? So you have basically like 7 chakras, which represent like basic survival functions, starting from the base of your spine, right? So basic survival functions, sex, food, your heart, you know, speech. And then it's like this. I have an argument with the chakras because then they say third eye, crown, and I think it's the other way around. There's a guy named Edgar Casey who's a lunatic, but he made a very compelling argument for that. I think he's right because if you go crown and then third eye, it follows the development of the neurological system, which makes good sense to me. So, at any rate, so you have basically emotion, authority, and logic, right? Pathos, ethos, logos. The example that I give for this, and we're gonna have to. This will be the last tangent, and then we're gonna start wrapping up because I got to stop hard at noon, noon my time. Imagine a king's court, right, or a royal court, we should say. There are 3 thrones. On the left, you have a very, very old queen. She's so old, no one knows how old she is. She's like Queen Elizabeth before she died, right? She's like a million years old. And she's beloved by the people. She doesn't really speak up in court, but really she's kind of in charge. Nobody necessarily admits it, but she really runs the show. She can talk in the king's ear, right? In the middle, you have the king, and he's sitting on a big golden fancy throne, and it's like super decked out and stuff. It's very imposing. It's kind of like, you know, you could think like a golden version of the Game of Thrones throne. It's very intimidating, right? It screams power. The king is like a middle-aged guy. He's authoritative. You can think like who's somebody intimidating that's like in their 40s, like, I don't know, The Rock. Let's say The Rock, right? Big, imposing dude. People do not actually like listening to him at all. His opinions are basically bad, but you have to do what he says because he's the king, he has the power, and he's threatening, right? That's part of ethos and power relationships is the perception of threat. So that's will. The queen is love. Will is nobody has to like it because it says what it says and you have to do what it says, right? And then on the right, you have a very little throne. It's like a chair. It's like a normal chair. And there's like an 8-year-old. who's sitting on that chair, and he's the prince. And the prince is right about everything all the time. Just perfectly logical, doesn't understand how human society works, pisses people off. Nobody likes to take orders from an 8-year-old, even if the 8-year-old's right. And very rarely, if an 8-year-old comes up and you're like teaching a class on some subject and the 8-year-old corrects you, most people will get mad at that, right? Because they're violating their authority and it feels emotionally bad. So that's the prefrontal cortex. It's very young in relative to the rest of the brain. People don't really listen to it. You can make a logical argument about why you shouldn't feel sad because your cat got run over. Doesn't matter. Doesn't do anything because it's overridden by the queen. If you say, hey, I'm going to make an argument why the president doesn't get to tell me what to do, good fucking luck. Ethos dominates, right? Nobody has to like it. It's not concerned with your feelings. It just works. If The Rock walks into a room and threatens you, unless you were like a very skilled fighter or a very large dude, the high likelihood is you're probably just going to do what he says, right? You can't make a logical argument about it. Exactly. Yeah, your brain says, hey, stop. He's in charge. He's big and imposing and can kill you with his hands, right? And the kid gets ignored, right? The kid will become the king if he can integrate emotion and authority because he's already logical, right? That's capital T truth, right? If you can understand how to make emotionally compelling arguments and you can develop the authority, I'm not saying literally become The Rock or be like imposing, but to understand how to accumulate clout in the social dynamic and what the rules of the world are, the unspoken rules of like that person's in charge because they're a better leader than you, or that person's in charge because they can fire you if they want to, right? People who have ADHD have even more trouble with an underdeveloped prefrontal. Maybe, although that would be a different discussion because I think ADHD is actually like the chaos half of the mind issue. It's not enough order and too much chaos, right? Because you're trying to deal, like there's always new things coming up and you're kind of equipped to deal with tons of things happening all the time. Whereas like my argument is basically like you have two different directions. If you go left or right, left brain stuff is going to be like autism, where you're really organized and orderly, but you don't understand social rules and you're not really super emotionally expressive. And then like ADHD, schizophrenia, they're trying to deal with chaos, but they're flailing because there's too much chaos happening and there's not enough order. So I think there's like an axis where they kind of, if you go too far one way, you end up screwed up, right? And you can see in psychology, there are 3 clusters of personality disorders, which are A, B, and C. I just learned about C. Actually, it used to just be A and B, I think. But you have like the schizotypal stuff is one group, and then you have like the emotional regulation group. And I don't have enough time to talk about that one. But so one more question that I'm going to dip very quickly. Anyone got anything?
No, other than I have to hop off here in a minute too.
Oh yeah, no. Thanks for coming out, everyone. This is great. This is mostly rant, but Tabalo understood and anticipated everything I was going to say. So props to him because he made this work.
Yeah, thanks for doing it, man.
For coming out and being awesome. All right, y'all.
Thanks, Garrett.
All right, we'll see you next Wednesday, guys. Have a great week. Take care, Tribe.